Hi everyone and welcome to the Empowered You podcast. I'm Javi Israel, your host, speaking to you from Sydney, Australia. After October 7, I found myself in uncomfortable situations, not sure how to respond or navigate. That's why I created the Empowered You, first an organization and now a podcast to equip you with the knowledge, skills and tools surrounding Israel and your Jewish identity. In each episode, we'll explore various topics from multiple perspectives so that you can feel informed, empowered, and proud of who you are. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Michael, we're starting.
Great.
Hello, Michael Scott. Hi.
Harvey, great to be with you from all the way over in New York City.
I know. How's the weather down there? Or up there? Up there, I should say, not down there. How's the weather?
Yeah, look, it's been cold. There's lots of white stuff on the ground. We had a blizzard about a week ago. The temperature got down to -15. We're not far from Central Park in New York, and there's plenty of white stuff still in the park, but most of it's clearing from the roads.
Meanwhile, I'm not going to tell you what the weather is today. It's like 36 or something crazy. So I'm staying indoors. We're like polar opposites. We're both staying indoors, but for different reasons.
Yeah, so we when Dracena and I left Sydney, I think it was in the mid-30s, and the next day when we got into New York, it lightly snowed on us, so it was quite a change.
Oh, wow. And Michael, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background? Where were you born, raised, for those who don't know you?
Yeah, certainly. Colonel Michael Scott, 30-year veteran of the Australian Army, born in a rural Queensland town by the name of Mount Isa. Nothing like a little bit of lead on the brain first up. Spent most of my life before the Army in Brisbane. So for those New South Wales viewers, I go for the correct state of origin team. At the end of school, year 12 in 1993, I joined the Army. And with the blink of an eye, I'm at the end of my first career after 30 years and embarking on my second career.
Did you always know that you wanted to go into the Army, or like how did you get to that career path?
Yeah, I think it's statistically boys mature a bit later than girls, and I certainly was representative of that pattern. I really didn't know what I wanted to do at the end of year 12, other than not going straight to university and not working in an office. And it was actually my mother that suggested I give the Australian Army a go until I figure things out. Back when I was a teenager, there was a scheme called the Ready Reserve Scheme, where you could do 1 year full-time and 4 years part-time, with the idea being that you get some life skills and experience, and then you get a way to bring some money in while you're studying an undergraduate degree. And indeed, fast-forwarding 25 plus years to when I spent time in Israel, I see some patterns in the way the IDF do their national service that reminds me of some of the better aspects of the 1990s Ready Reserve Scheme.
Awesome. So I want to take a step back because you already mentioned Israel and the Army. So I'm assuming that there's some connection with you being a colonel in the Australian Army and then being in Israel. So you're in the Army. That was supposed to be, a 4-year stunt, but it ends up being over 20 years or something along those lines.
Yeah, look, you join the Army with an initial minimum period of service, and broadly it's time spent in training, repaid plus a year. And so if you're 18 months in training, you double that, you've got 3 years plus a year. You've got an initial period of service of 4 years. But my personal experience was that I found I loved the profession of arms and I loved service life, even as I was going through recruit training. And things that appealed to me right from the outset was the esprit de corps, coming together as a member of a team and working to common goals. I joined the Army as a private soldier, and I served as a private soldier for a couple of years from 1994 to the middle of 1996. In 1995, I applied for and won a position to the Royal Military College, Duntroon. I'm a Duntroon graduate. I entered the Royal Australian Armoured Corps, posted up to Darwin before East Timor, and indeed East Timor was my first operation in 1999. There's been a few since.
Wow. And so then how did you end up in Israel?
Okay, that's actually fast forwarding 20 odd years, but I think my love of Israel, or my interest in the Middle East and Israel came about from my early 20s. I remember a mentor giving me the advice that, Michael, as part of your professional development, you ought to read and study about all of Israel's wars. And that was looking at the profession of arms, manoeuvre theory, bold action, strategy and tactics. And so studying Israel's modern campaigns, 48, 56, 67, 73, the Intifadas, the Lebanon campaigns, it brought me in touch with the history and the politics and the repeated peace attempts. And so I think after October 7, when looking backwards across my career, I think it was from my early 20s that I was a Zionist. And so the interest in Israel and what was happening in that strategically important part of the world has been with me for many decades. But my specific deployment to Israel from July 2019 to September 2021 with the United Nations, that came about when there was a letter through the military human resources manager identifying a position that none of us were tracking. I and maybe 20 or 30 of my closest mates all nominated for the position, but I was fortunate that the Chief of Army accepted me. And so my wife and I posted to Israel in the middle of 2019, where we resided for 27 months. I was serving as a senior appointment holder with the United Nations Unarmed Peacekeeping Mission.
Okay, so I want to take a step back because we've said so much. It's so fascinating. I just want to go back. I never knew that the Australian Army actually studied the wars in Israel and took, I guess, they got actually like strategic military techniques and inspiration, or what to do, what not to do. Does every Australian who goes through the army, are they all studying the wars that are, that went on in Israel, or was it specifically you or your specific, I guess, unit or area? Or is it something that all Aussies who are part of the army, is it like part of the course?
I actually think that if all of these these queers for Palestine and chickens for KFC and the River to the Sea Brigade actually understood how much of their daily lives were influenced either by the Jewish diaspora or by Israel, that they'd be quite shocked. I read as an adult, last 10 years or so, the story of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, Heuristics Thinking Traps. I think it was a book by Michael Lewis on the Undoing Project. And so it didn't occur to me that some of the fundamentals of training, education and development right across my military career harkened back to those two great Jewish Israelis that participated in what the 1967 and perhaps 1973 wars for survival. My corps, the Royal Australian Armoured Corps, that's tanks, cavalry, vehicles. We study heavily Israel's wars and campaigns, the Sinai, up on the Golan, the Valley of Tears, and me personally, I've got a real thirst for knowledge. A mentor again in my late teens, early 20s. Used to devour books, and I think across my whole professional life, I've looked at the habits of highly influential and exceptional individuals, and to the extent I can, I try to emulate them. And so Jim Mattis, who was a US Marine Corps 4-star general that I very much looked up to during his military service, his nickname was the Warrior Monk. He used to devour hundreds of books each year, and many thousands across a working lifetime. And I think if it's good enough for him and a young Winston Churchill, someone I've read about in my earlier years, who again at an early age devoured books, I see that as a great way to emulate and try and reach a potential that I might have not been able to foresee as a younger individual.
Wow. It's incredible. I don't feel like many young boys, I know that you said it takes time to mature, but that they actually take that time and they take what they're learning quite seriously. And it's really admirable, but it shows on who you are. And then I can also understand why you were chosen to be deployed and to go to Israel. I'm just curious because you said that you were a part of the United Nations. Can I can't the United Nations something. You'll fill in the blank in a moment. But what exactly were you supposed to do? Are you there to keep the peace or something? Because I've been to Israel many times, whether I was up north in the Golan Heights and I would see these United Nation trucks, or whether I was, more central within. I don't like to really call it the West Bank, but I guess it's the West Bank, or in Hebrew we say Yehuda v'Shamron, that area. So I always go to Hebron, which for us as Jews is the holiest. I mean, there's 4 holy cities. Yep. Jerusalem is the number 1, but Hebron is right after, because that is where the patriarchs and matriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I'm sure you already know this, and Sarah and Rebecca, not Rachel, but Leah, they're buried there. And so whenever I go to Hebron, I also always see these United Nation trucks. So is that connected to what you were doing, or what exactly were you doing? I'm very curious to know.
Yeah, look, there's no shortage of United Nations individuals and agencies over there. That was my experience in 2019 to 2021. And I'm of the view that thinning them right down would be a step in the right direction. And we could completely blow our timings if we were to talk to all of the UN entities. We won't go down that rabbit hole. But I think at the higher level, you've got United Nations Department of Peacekeeping Operations and United Nations Department of Political Affairs. That's probably a nice delineation at this stage. And the reprehensible United Nations Relief Works Agency, that's part of the Department of Political Affairs. My mission, the United Nations Truce Supervision Organisation, was a part of the United Nations Department of Peacekeeping Affairs. And so in 1948, soon after the establishment of the United Nations and the founding of the State of Israel, the United Nations Truce Supervision Organisation was the first ever UN peacekeeping mission. And it's still going. And we operate in 5 countries: Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. The mandate dates back to 1948. It's had a couple of updates since, where different UN Security Council resolutions, such as up in Lebanon, UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which was established in 2006, they're adjustments to the overall mission and mandate, but it's a long-serving mission. Australia has been a troop contributing country since 1956, and to my knowledge, I am one of, if not the only, Aussie that's ever held the appointment as the Deputy Chief of Staff. So the military deputy to a head of mission. I served for 3 months as deputy to a Norwegian Major General, but don't fall off your chair. There's problems in the United Nations, and that was my experience as well, where when my boss hit end of mission at my 3-month mark, she went back to Norway, and based on some squabbling by a couple of permanent 5 members, They froze her successor, and for the next 2 years I acted high duties in the absence of the Major General. And put simply, we were there to observe and monitor and report the terms of the various ceasefire engagements. I had 153 military officers under my command, and we operated in Israel, headquartered in Jerusalem. I had a liaison officer in Jerusalem. We had a big team of unarmed observers in the South Litani River sector of Lebanon, from the Mediterranean up to the Mount Hermon complex, south of the Litani River. I also had a liaison officer up in Beirut. Coming around, I had a liaison officer in Damascus and Syria. I had a big team of observers over in the Quneitra sector of southwestern Syria. I had another observer group up in the Golan. They resided in Tiberias. I had a detachment that would attend Amman, Jordan, and I had a couple of officers permanently living down in Egypt. It started in Ismailia, which was on the western bank of the Suez Canal, about halfway between Suez and Port Said. But in my time on the mission, they relocated into Cairo.
Wow, so you were in charge of a lot of people. Like you said, you took over for a time, and you've got so many different, I guess, would you call them soldiers? I don't even know what they're called. I'm not sure if that's the correct terminology. Is it soldiers?
UN military observers or military experts on mission. My mission
Okay.
was all commissioned officers. I had 153 officers under my command. They were drawn from 27 different troop contributing countries, from rank sort of captain and major up to lieutenant colonel. And some of the countries that the officers originated from, non-traditional partners from an Australian perspective, Russian Federation, China, a number of Eastern European countries, a number of Western European countries as well, South American. There was a team member from an African nation. It was an extraordinary experience.
Wow, and it's so diverse. It's so interesting. All these different countries, I guess it's a bit ironic in a way. They're all coming together to maintain peace, I think. But like, I don't know how much these countries back home are maintaining peace. But anyways, it's interesting. I never even knew that this even existed.
Yeah.
I guess Israelis also, I know that from the Israelis that I've been around, they're not very keen on the Nations having much of a presence, I guess.
Yeah.
But
Look, I get that. The United Nations has horribly let down the people in Israel. And for your viewers, I think a classic example that I point to is in the lead up to the Six-Day War in early 1967. The president of Egypt, Nasser, during a stage of pan-Arab nationalism where he headed up not only current Egypt but current Syria, he directed the UN to get out of the Sinai for the purposes of allowing the Egyptian military free access to kill all the Jews. And from a technical legal perspective, the observers, they were armed observers at that stage. They were only operating there at the invitation of the parties. And so in this case, where Egypt said, "Get out, we want to kill the Jews," they scurried away. So that's I think an example of how peacekeepers didn't do just that. They let people down, and my landlord in Jerusalem, lovely couple in their 70s, they lived through the Six-Day War, and they talked to me about the fear before that, where people were genuinely expecting another Holocaust. They were digging graves in the back of their yards because they thought they were all going to be slaughtered. And so I get the issues with the UN. And look, I'm the first to call out some of the problems in this day and age. And one I point to is that with that understanding that peacekeepers are only there at the express permission of the parties, you fast forward to the second half of 2024, where the democratically elected Prime Minister of the State of Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu said, UN, please move out of the South Litani River sector. Hezbollah have built infrastructure right up to, on top of and underneath your positions. Move away so you don't get hurt. This current UN Secretary General made the decision, probably on advice, but the buck stops with him. He's the Sec Gen, that no, they'll stay. That's something I've got a fundamental concern with, and I know that the day that we filmed this, it's what the 27th of January, the Holocaust Memorial Day here in the US. The President of the State of Israel, Isaac Herzog, addressed the UN just a number of hours ago, just down the road from where I am at the moment, and pointed to the fact that the UN is at a crossroads. I agree with the President of Israel. There's some changes that are required. In my judgment, the UN is needed. It's better to have a body where people can talk about their problems rather than not. But there's a broom, in my judgment, that needs to be taken through the United Nations because it's not currently fit for purpose.
We're not going to focus too much on the United Nations, but it's it's a loaded topic, and it's an interesting one. And I think that many Jews, we hear about the United Nations, and obviously post October 7, for us, Israeli women and men that were raped, and no one really called out the actual horrors. And so for us, the United Nations has failed us. But it's interesting speaking to someone who was actually part of the United Nations in actual living. You actually were living in Israel. Did you also travel to the other countries, Jordan or Lebanon or Egypt, or you just stayed within Israel?
No, you can't command from behind a keyboard, so I got forward as often as I could. Spent many a time patrolling in the South Litani River sector. I've been up to Beirut a number of times. I've driven several times east of Beirut, up the hills, down through the Bekaa Valley, the Masna crossing to Damascus. I've spent many days in Damascus, patrolled up and down either side of the area of separation in the Golan or the Connectra sector, driven through the crossing down near Eilat, all the way down to Sharm el Sheikh, up the other side of the Sinai Peninsula, under the canal, patrolled up and down either side of the Sinai Peninsula. The Suez Canal, rather, across into Cairo. It was extraordinary experience. I'm not there to do military tourism, to get forward and to experience. You see things, and it wasn't just a drive; it was patrolling, and they all had purposes. But it was great to I guess understand a level of detail that fills in the blanks so that I understood some of the nuance.
I'm sure. And I just curious, were you ever scared, or were you ever in quite frightening situations, or everyone respects the United Nations? No one messes with you guys, I guess.
A number of UN people have lost their lives in the time of that particular mission. And, not my first rodeo at that stage. I was a colonel. I'd served for over 25 years at that stage of my career. I'd been to East Timor, Bougainville. I'd served in Iraq, 2 tours of Afghanistan, including a combat team command in southern Afghanistan. So I'd been, exposed to circumstances. My point to my observers is that complacency can kill. And so we were operating in between nation states that are still at war. Ceasefire is not peace. Ceasefire is just that. And we're operating in an environment where there's also non-state actors such as Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic motivated individuals, radicals from lots of different ethnicities. My point was that staying sharp and remembering where you are may just save your life. And whenever you've got a huge number of people, you've got inherent forms of chaos, particularly with so many different countries. And so, like we see in society, some of my individuals were alcoholics. Some of my individuals you might be able to trust with your life, but not with your wife. That's just a bunch of human beings. And something I've always enjoyed in the profession of arms is getting to know individuals' strengths, weaknesses, and where you see character flaws, you provide additional checks and balances. And there was one young Irish officer. He was in his, I think, early 30s. And one day at work, I smelt liquor on him. It was almost as though he put a bottle of Scotch whiskey as aftershave, and he'd had a bender and turned up to work gassed the next day. And it's like, hey mate, this is the last time it happens. It doesn't happen again. I'd gotten to know him. He was a reasonable officer, but I established a boundary. I did that with others, including Russians, and there was one particular case where a Russian individual, he was in his 50s, he thought he'd have a conversation with a young, pretty Sunni Muslim lady in a bakery in southern Lebanon, that just happened to be working in the bakery of her soon-to-be in-laws. Massive incident. Here was a Russian that should have known better. She was in her early 20s, but I held him to account, and I think I moved him, I censured him, I put him on a final warning through the process in the United Nations, but managed to do that in such a way that actually the individual and his senior national representative thanked me for the way I handled it, because I allowed due process and I kept people updated. And one of the frustrating aspects of the United Nations, I think, which is only good as the people that are in it, and in my view, a whole bunch of people that have been there for a long time need to be fired. A person on the mission was sort of saying, "Oh, look, he's from Russia. It's a permanent 5 country. Just let it go," or But for me, culture is what happens when the boss isn't looking, and also something with a military force is that you will completely disenfranchise all of those people who do the right thing day in, day out, if there's a transgressor and there's no consequence to misbehaviour. And so as soon as I heard about this, it became the most important thing on my plate. And I handle it in such a way that I maintained discipline. It was seen to be maintained, but I did it in such a way that Russian team members that may have not been comfortable with an RC doing that in other circumstances were really pleased with the outcome.
Michael, I'm thinking you could write a book about your experience on your mission, and it could be a movie or a TV show. And I think it would be a hit. It's like really interesting. But I just want to focus because you really got to see the Middle East.
Yep.
There are many Aussies who have not had the opportunities that you have had. And so you've seen it with your own eyes. So after everything that you've seen and all the different countries that you've been to within the Middle East, would you call yourself a Zionist? And what is your definition of Zionism?
Yes, I am a Zionist, publicly, proudly, unashamedly. Zionism is my belief in the political and cultural self-determination of the Indigenous people in their homeland. And I think the better question is, who wouldn't be a Zionist? I think we've got a real problem in the West where our education, big chunks of the media, and also I'm ashamed to say, not only fringe parties, but mainstream political parties, or at least some of them, appear to have been hijacked by hard left zealots and social Marxists. And so, Zionism is a beautiful term, and indeed part of what I'm doing in my second career as the Chief Executive Officer and founder of the 2023 Foundation, a harm minimisation charity to combat anti-Semitism and foster peaceful coexistence, is to try and push back on some of this gaslighting and projection that we're seeing in Western media that is of Orwellian proportions. A friend of mine, Laura Tates, commented on an article I wrote in the Australian Jewish News a couple of months back about George Orwell's 1984. She read that as a student 40 years. Laura's point is that it was misnamed. 1984 should have been named 2024. It's horrible where we seem to have landed as a Western civilization since the atrocities of October 7, 2023. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, I think it's a lot coming from you, because if I say I'm a Zionist, I guess people could say, well, you're very biased. I mean, I am a Jew, and for me, Israel is the Jewish homeland, and everyone's welcome to live there, but it is a Jewish homeland. But it's really, I guess it's refreshing to have someone who actually lived in the Middle East and, worked for the United Nations, to have such a perspective, even though it's funny because I think that most, I don't know, most Aussies who I have met who actually have been to Israel physically, they are also Zionists. So I'm not sure if actually going to Israel and seeing Israel for what it is in reality makes people a Zionist. And I'm actually curious, because you worked within the United Nations, did other people who were doing a part of your mission, I know that you were the chief, but all the other officers, were they also feeling what you feel? Or did everyone kind of have different perspectives? Or was it not really a discussion and everyone just focused on maintaining the peace, which is, essentially why you guys were even there to begin with?
Yeah, so
I'm just curious.
while we're there, strictly neutral, impartial, uh, that was how we operated. And it's I've only become active in my work since October 7, 2023, and October 9, 2023, and those shameful events at the Sydney Opera House in Australia. I remember speaking with my wife Tresina, who lived in Israel with me for 27 months. It's like, sweetheart, we've got to do something. This is just outrageous. And so we started planning and thinking through what is now the 2023 Foundation, a nascent global harm minimisation charity to combat anti-Semitism. As to other people, opinions like backsides, everyone's got one. 100 people go across. You'll have 100 different opinions, which is better than 100 Jewish people going across. There'll be 240 different opinions, as indicated just last week at the QUT, and the self-hating Jews that were patently anti-Semitic. The fake JCA, my goodness. But look, I understand the nuance. I've lived in Israel. I understand that 20% of Israelis are Arabs. Most of them are Muslims. They've all got full rights. In Israeli modern history, there's an Arab judge, as I understand it, that incarcerated a former prime minister through the courts of law. There's also, I've got dear Muslim Arab friends, Christian Arab Israeli friends, dear Druze friends. There's also Circassians and Baha'i, a number of minorities. This thought that Israel is an apartheid state, it's just offensive. And indeed, I was very fortunate to attend Israel again last year in September 2024 as part of a delegation, and we met with the Prime Minister, Netanyahu. We met with the then Defence Minister, Gallant, had high-level briefings with the IDF, Mossad, Shin Bet, and I was fortunate in my capacity as the CEO of a foundation combating anti-Semitism to be taken into Gaza, down the Philadelphia corridor from Kerem Shalom all the way to the Swedish village. And so I was actually able to see the work of the IDF, understand the operational environment, and coming back. And I think that the first time that we'd probably come into one another's contact was when I was very fortunate to be invited to speak at the October 7 commemoration event at Christensen Park in Vaucluse in October 2024, where I publicly made the point that the IDF is the most lawful, ethical, and moral military fighting force that world history has ever known. And I stand by that claim.
Yeah. And have you ever, I'm sure you've had uncomfortable situations where people have you gotten, I guess, hate for what you're doing, or have you engaged in conversations where people have said, well, clearly you don't know what's up because I watch the news every day and Israel's committing a genocide. So how do you navigate those conversations?
Yeah, look, I think simple way is that, or a reflection actually, is that since October 7, 2023, I've wanted to become a dentist. I've wanted to knock people's teeth out that are peddling falsehoods and mistruths. But of course, you get more with honey than you do with vinegar. And so some of my early approaches to friends, people I'd gone to school with, Brisbane Grammar School 30 years ago, where I see on social media they put genocide state and from the river to the sea. Hey mate, I've lived over there for a couple of years. That's not what's going on. Can we have a conversation about it? And I just get shouted at and cancelled. And so I thought, well, that approach isn't working. And I went quiet for a bit and I started planning and thinking through what would actually move the needle. And that was the origins of the 2023 Foundation. I think you hit on some absolute gold before in a comment that you actually need to get across and interact with the environment that is Israel in all its perfect imperfections to understand the nuance. You need to walk a street in Tel Aviv to understand a little bit about what it would be like being under rocket attack, or wanting to go to the Dizengoff Mall with your kids to do the shopping during the second Intifada and be at risk of blowing up, or the sheer terror of people during that stage, which was only 20 years ago. People terrified, parents terrified about letting their kids go onto a school bus for fear of suicide attack or knifings or anything else. And so I think to help people empathize and relate, they've got to be across to Israel. It's just impossible for them, for a reasonable, open-minded Australian that hasn't been across there, to understand the realities and what it's like, because if their view of Israel is formed by what they see on the ABC, they're being misled. And to overcome malice and misinformation, there's no better way that I know than lived personal experience. And Harvey, you are a very smart young lady. If you can think of a better way, please let me know, because I don't know it.
No, I think having those conversations and education and going to Israel, like you said, but it's hard to get people to get there, especially now.
Well, that's where I come in. So, my Zionism is coming from an atypical place. There's many Jewish Zionists. Your viewers, particularly the non-Jewish viewers, may be surprised to understand that there's a whole lot of passionately anti-Zionist Jewish people. 900 plus supporters of the fraudulent JCA. I read just this morning after a wonderful conversation with my chairman, Daniel Lipschitz. There's Christian church-going Zionists. I sort of fit in the middle where my Zionism has come about from the profession of arms. I'm a Christian, I'm an Anglican, I believe in the Judeo-Christian traditions, but I've been to a synagogue more in the last 8 months than I've been to a Christian church in the last 45 years. And so I think my point of differentiation is that I can reach out and I can encourage and incentivize people from a number of walks of life. I can access the silent majority and help them understand and then take up the mantle of influencing, whether it be within their family, their workplace, or on social media. That's the ripple effect. And your point in education is spot on in my judgment. 3 pillars that I've developed with my foundation is education, opportunity, and understanding. They are mutually reinforcing, and together they form a very powerful whole.
Yeah. Wish that and maybe this is also part of your future plans, is to go into Australian schools and run these kind of sessions. Because I think, like you were saying about the youth, and adults, we know Aussie adults are watching ABC News or Channel 9 News or 7, but the children, the future of the world, they are watching TikTok. And it is, I can't even, the lies that are being spewed on TikTok in a matter of seconds, and the propaganda and misinformation that these young, impressionable minds are being fed, it's really frightening. So, I'm sure, I don't know, maybe you don't deal with the youth, but I feel like what you're doing is so incredible, and it would be amazing if we could do
Yep.
that for Australian youth, just regular Aussies, because what they're being exposed to, it is horrendous, and they are the future.
Yep.
So before I ask what you think the future will bring, but does the 2023 Foundation also plan on dealing with youth, or you're not catering to that kind of space?
Yeah, so we're in the business of helping people, understand, the truth through lived personal experience. But when I've regularly found myself in a position where there's more on my plate than what one man can do, and so a rational response is only do what only you can do. And I use the example of the conductor of the orchestra. The minute I try to play multiple musical instruments at the same point of time, 1, it looks stupid, and 2, it sounds really bad. And so I'll keep the baton and try to orchestrate a number of effects in parallel. And one of the lines of inquiry or effort we're working through is to partner with certain people in the education sector to incentivise an opportunity to get them across to Israel to experience. It might be through short courses or an undergrad or a master's degree. It might be placement with an organisation like the Histradut or one of the unions. There's a number of vectors of opportunity, but absolutely, bringing some educators across. One of my principles, I think, is that I wouldn't deign to think that I can influence people, for example, in the medical profession, more than someone that is reasonable, open-minded, that I could bring across to actually operate in the medical profession over in Israel, where they would see, for example, Hadassah Hospital, the big hospital just out of Jerusalem near Ein Kerem, that you've got many Muslim and Christian Arab doctors operating in the hospitals in Israel. And if I was to bring someone in the medical profession across on a placement or an exchange or even a fact-finding tour, when they get back, they could speak about their experiences. Same with educators and teachers. And indeed, if any of your listeners are interested in the work of the 2023 Foundation or may have collaboration opportunities, I'd encourage them to Google 2023 Foundation. You'll see the programs, you'll see the team, what we're about. And indeed, if you've got a good idea that you think will combat anti-Semitism and foster peaceful coexistence, I'm all ears. I'm genuine in my desire to want to partner and collaborate with those that are of a similar mindset, because whether we like it or not, when our gaze was elsewhere, our enemies have been incredibly busy. And I was shocked by how far the shadow has now extended. I was shocked with the anti-Semitism that I've seen unleashed in my country of birth, Australia. I don't recognise my values in the current government in a lot of the mainstream media dialogue. I don't recognise my values in the education sector, whether it's in primary or high schools or the tertiary sector. To paraphrase Elon Musk, I think many have caught the woke mind virus, and we need to help build allies, because we're actually on the back foot. And I think the way that we can look at positively influence, because we do have agency, is to partner and collaborate and bring people across in small groups based on something that they, one, would be interested in, and two, that would benefit them, to experience Israel in all its perfect imperfections.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll get there. When you put your mind to something, anything is possible. If there's a will, there's a way. And I'm actually curious what you think about the future, because we were saying how obviously we've got to focus one thing at a time, and we'll get there. But the youth is something that's huge. And even not just the youth, just regular everyday Australians that are watching the mainstream news and that are being fed these ideas. And for me, yeah, it's woke, but it's even more than that. They're being fed these it's like pure lies. It's, in some ways, this whole situation is actually really simple. It's really black and white. There's good and there's evil in many, not in every way of this war, in some manners. And I don't know, what do you think is going to unfold over the next 5-10 years? Like, what will the future bring?
Yeah, look, it's we're in a period of constant competition. I think that historians may in time describe the period in which we live and raise our kids as the antebellum period. In my judgment, things will worsen before they improve, because I just know no precedent in human history where the challenges we saw in Europe in the 1930s, or what we're seeing with vile anti-Semitism in Australia, that pogrom on the 7th of November 2024 in Amsterdam, where those Israeli soccer fans were set upon in premeditated and organised violence. That's a pogrom. I've lived through a pogrom. I believed once in the promise of never again, but never again is now, to paraphrase my friend Mark Leach. Coming back to my assessment of the circumstances, we are in constant competition, and we've got to rise to meet the challenges of our time. But I do believe that there's nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come, and I also believe in the ability of determining a better tomorrow based on the shoulders of the many and the willing and the able. And something I've always thought about is that a big problem or a big weight is best carried forward into a better tomorrow on the shoulders of the many. And I'm genuine in my interest and desire to partner and collaborate, because if too much weight is on just my or just your shoulders, our back breaks, we suffer, and everything else suffers. I'm interested, and I know you are too, in having people to say, Harvey, I'm with you in this. Give me half of that weight and we'll carry it forward into tomorrow. And I gave a speech a couple of weeks ago about Jewish mysticism, talking about what, 40 plus righteous among the nations in any generation. I'm on the lookout for them. And when I locate them, I'll partner and collaborate with them to combat anti-Semitism and to foster peaceful coexistence.
Wow. Wow, Colonel Michael Scott, I am blown away by your conviction and your determination and your passion and your genuine concern for what's going on. And I can see that for you, you realize the bigger picture, that it's, people might think this is just a Jewish kind of problem, the Jews, but I feel like you understand the bigger picture at play. And are you worried about this idea of, our Western democratic values being thrown away? Like, is that something that you think about often?
Yeah,
Or
look, Ronald Reagan had a great quote that freedom is only one generation away from extinction. We've got to work at it. We're in a period of constant competition, and I do believe that the people that are coming for you and your family are also coming for me and mine. The violent Islamic militant fundamentalist, the jihadist, poses a safety risk to your family and to mine. And what I'm deeply troubled about is the level of radicalism in Australian mosques. And this was actually a wonderful Muslim intellectual from the United Arab Emirates that brought it to my attention when he said that the messages in Australian mosques would make Islamic State preachers in the Middle East blush. This was an Islamic academic that I heard speak at Mark Leach's Never Again Is Now activity a number of months ago. He's from a country that is an Abraham Accords partner. The UAE is at peace with Israel. There's a ministry of tolerance in the UAE, and Muslim Brotherhood is outlawed. They've got zero tolerance for fanaticism. But the reality is that what Islam is in its 14th century of violence and bloodshed, far more Muslims die at the hands of jihadists than do Christians and Jews. And so, hearkening back to my purpose and my mission statement of my charity, combating anti-Semitism and fostering peaceful coexistence, because I've seen in Israel Jews, whether they be Orthodox or secular or even anti-Semitic Jews, live really well with Christians and Arab Muslims, whether they be Sunni, Shia, Druze, Circassians and Baha'is. I think that Israel is a shining example of what peaceful coexistence and tolerance looks like. Dear friends of mine are members of the gay and lesbian community in Israel, and I'm tackling head on this quiz for Palestine nonsense, chickens for KFC. In June this year, I'll be developing with my foundation a Pride March rotation of gay and lesbian Australians coming across to commemorate Pride March in Israel, in Tel Aviv, which I know to be the nearest thing to the Sydney gay and lesbian Mardi Gras there is on the planet. It beggars belief that gay and lesbian members of university fraternities could be throwing rocks at Israel when it's the very example, and it's the only plural tolerant country within 1,500 mile radius. And so Israel has an amazing story to tell. I'll help that story to be seen and heard. And I'm moving forward at what Stephen Covey would refer to as the speed of trust. I believe I've got quite a public profile and I'm well known within the Sydney Jewish community, but I'm at that stage now where I'm needing assistance. For 30 years, I've never been comfortable or needed to ask people for money, but I'm now at a position that I actually need to partner and collaborate with supporters to develop some of the resources and the parameters to allow me to build the allies. And so the business that I am in with the 2023 Foundation is that I want to grow the next generation of Douglas Murrays, Richard Kemps, Gemma Tognini's, Erin Molan's, Nova Peris's. That's my aiming mark. And my modelling has identified that 70 people in the first 12 months reasonable, open-minded Australians with little or no first-hand experience with Israel. I think part of my unique value proposition is that I can access, through just dialogue and engagement, people that are not currently being reached, and they're members of the ethnic Chinese community, ethnic Indian community. I've got friends from my military service that are in fly-in, fly-out mines that are heavily involved in veterans engagement. Lots of influences in every walk of life. Quiet Australians. In 5 years' time, the modelling is 750 people, and if 1% of that number come away as passionate as I am, that's 8 people. That's a very good thing.
I could not agree with you more. And I am so grateful and thankful to have you. And I'm sure every Jewish person is so grateful and to have Colonel Michael Scott and also the 2023 Foundation that is taking an active stance. You guys are being proactive about everything, and you're really tackling it on head on, but realistically. And it's not easy. It's not easy, but you believe in it, and it's something that is so important. So the 2023 Foundation is reaching the wider community, but what is your message specifically for the Jewish community? How can we get involved in the 2023 Foundation, or even if we don't actively get involved in your foundation, what can we do to deal and navigate with this current climate that we're living in? What can we do as Jewish people?
Look, we've got agency, and I think, put very simply, it's our time for our light to shine.
Your message is plain and simple. Just be a lamplighter. Just do it.
Yeah. So look, remaining or remaining silent or on the sidelines or crossing fingers and hoping someone else will do it for us, that doesn't get us very far. in a 30-year military career, I've always admired an individual acceptance of responsibility. And if you look at change theory, and I'm most of the way through a Master's of Business Admin, which is helping me get from my first career, 30 years in the military, into my second career, private sector, building a global charity. You've got early adopters, fast movers, and some people are resistant to change. But I think if we get up and we look at having a conversation, there's safety in numbers, and I think it's a union jingle, but the people united can never be defeated, and it's up to us to reach across the divide, to partner and collaborate. We get more with honey than we do with vinegar. I'm in the business of building allies. I'm having quiet conversations with people, not in an auditorium of anti-Semites, because you just get shouted down. And I've got no interest in being in a hatchet job like my friend Peter Wertheim was a couple of days ago, where he went on the ABC and it was a 3-on-1 pile on the president of the ECAJ with 2 anti-Semitic Jews and a moderator that was fundamentally biased. That I respect what Peter has done. That's not for me. I will look at quietly influencing through conversations, bringing people across. Coming back to your point with education, if there's people that you or members of the Jewish community or just the audience that are listening to this, if you know someone that is an educator that might be interested in understanding a little bit more, might feel the same way about Judeo-Christian values as I do, you're the sort of team member that may be suitable in due course for a scholarship provided by the 2023 Foundation alumni. I'm very patient, and I understand that the first couple of people, they will be no more than candles in the wind, and so they can't shine too bright because I'll just be blown away. But after we've built, I think, a critical mass over time, we'll start to move the calculus. And indeed, that's just essentially doing what our opposition forces and our enemies have been doing while we've been busy with other pursuits. I think we're on catch up, and the longer we take to mobilise and get going, arguably the bigger the challenge will be, because relatively speaking, we're starting further behind. And my tipping point came on October 9, 2023, after I saw that shameful display at the Sydney Opera House. That was enough for me. Some people reached their tipping point when the Adas synagogue was burnt in Melbourne. Some people may have reached their tipping point that after the childcare centre near Maroubra was firebombed just recently. And for those people that haven't yet reached a tipping point, chances are they probably will never get to where they need to be. So we need to work with those that understand the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, understand what people have been able to achieve throughout human history, coming together even in periods of adversity, but authoring a better tomorrow. And again, the simple binary choice for me is, the look yourself in the eye in the mirror test. Will I be a bystander? Yes or no, a binary choice. And come October 10, the answer was no, I wouldn't be a bystander. And looking at my unique experiences, I've got a point of differentiation. I've got an ability, I think, to partner and collaborate and to reach audiences not currently being accessed. And indeed, the Mark Twain quote that means a lot to me is the two most important days in a person's life are the day you're born and the day you understand why. Since October 2023, I've had my why.
Unbelievable. Wow. Colonel Michael Scott, thank you so much. Thank you for everything that you're doing for the Jewish community and for the wider community. And I wish you all of the blessings, and may you go from strength to strength. Thank you so, so much for your time.
Harvey, really looking forward to catching up with you two when I get back to Australia in May. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.